Hi Jennifer. The question James asked at the end of class about how to segment your texture up into the window elements made me realize that there's an option that I hadn't considered. I'm going to explain it to you. So if you go to aescripts.com, you can download a free plugin here, a free script called Masks to Layers. And it says it's $14, but you can actually type in zero and name your own price and add to cart. Obviously, if you use it a lot, you should pay the developer a little bit. But once you've downloaded that, you'll need to grab the file that's in there and install it. So you'll go to your hard drive and find, actually mine's on the other drive. Where is it? No, it's on this drive. And find your After Effects folder. Go inside support files and find, not plugins, but scripts. And inside script UI panels, you can put in that script and then start After Effects. All right, once we're in After Effects, we want to create, let's say we create our main timeline. I'm just going to do it at 1920 by 1080, so I'll call it main timeline. And then we want to import a wall texture, and we don't want to just drag that in. What we really want to do is, because we're going to work with masks, and if we create masks and then we decide to change the texture later, it's going to be difficult. If our texture becomes a different size, it's going to ruin the masks. So let's not do that. Let's set it up in a composition. And it'll also give us more versatility other than that. So let's create a composition the same size as the main timeline, and we'll call it wall texture. Why not? Okay, now inside wall texture, that's where we want to add our wall texture. And I'm gonna make that nice and big so it fills the screen. And now I'm gonna close that composition. Now I'm in the main timeline, so I'll just go double click on that just to make sure, and I'll drag in my wall texture composition and it'll fill the screen. Now I want to start drawing masks to define my windows, and I could do this, but it's going to be difficult to get them all in the right spot, so I'd recommend that you use the ruler. Go to View, Show Rulers, and drag out guides to exactly where you want your windows to be, the window edges. Might turn the transparency of this down so we can see that a bit better. So let's say I just do a few rows here. That's enough, and then I'll probably do one here and here, and you can take more care with this. And at any time you can press Command semicolon to hide your guides, which is handy. And now if we draw masks, and I'll hide the rulers, if we draw the mask, as long as we have View Snap to Guides on, then when we draw this, it'll snap to those edges. So I can just keep drawing new masks and know that I'm getting them in the exact right spot. And the seam is the most important. You want the edge of this purple mask to line up exactly with the edge of this green mask. So I'll do a few of these. Alright, so now I've drawn them, I might hide these guides. I might increase the transparency of this layer, and you can see they're all quite seamless, which is great. If I show masks again, I don't need to look at the masks, but if we just see, we've got all these masks now. And if I go up to Window and open up that script that we installed, Masks to Layers, it gives me this palette where I can click Proceed, and it'll divide all the masks up onto their own layers. So now I'll go to anchor point and I'll say move to mask center. So when it does that, it's going to move the anchor point from the middle of the layer to the middle of every mask. I'll hit proceed and it'll hide my original layer, and it'll give me all these layers with anchor points in the middle. Alright, so now we need to make all our layers 3D, and we can start animating them. But I'm going to animate them one way, and you'll see, we'll look at why that's not the best way to do it, even though it's probably the most straightforward way. So I'll animate this layer here, and I can hit P, and I can say go to 2 seconds, keyframe it, go in a little bit, have it come forward, then have it move to the side, and then I'll just copy those, paste them, and reverse them. So now that's working. It's getting a bit of a weird smooth motion there, so I'll change it to spatial linear just so it's really rigid movement. That's better. Okay, so that's working. The problem with this is that, well, there's no problem with this. If we want to animate each layer manually like that, we can do so. But what I'd like to do, and what I think you'd like to do, is be able to say, okay, I've animated that one, now can I apply that same animation to this one? So you want to be able to grab these, copy those, and then go somewhere else in the timeline, select this layer, and paste it. But the problem is it doesn't paste just that relative movement relative to where it was. It pastes all the movement and puts it where that original one that you copied was. So it's still pasted, but it's just in the wrong spot now. Now we could select all those keyframes and move them back. As long as they're all selected and we're on a keyframe, then it's gonna work fine, but it might be hard to position that back in the same position, and it's a bit frustrating. So let's just undo this and let's look at another method. Okay, I'm going to delete this now. Okay, now one method we could use is we could put a null directly in the center of that, at the exact same spot, and parent this to that, and that would be relative to the null, and we could rig it like that so that it worked for the other ones, but we'd end up with a null for every screen, and it's a bit annoying. So another way would be to use the transform effect like I showed in class, because we can apply a transform, and a transform works relative to the layer. So if I animate this, move it over, when I hit U and view that, I can copy that transform, or copy those keyframes, and paste it onto something else. Let's hope this works, because I haven't tested it. And it does the same thing, and it's relative to that layer. So that works. The problem is the transform effect only has 2 values. Even though it's a 3D layer, the transform effect only works in 2D. So we can only do the 2 dimensions in it. So what we're going to do is delete that transform, and let's delete this transform, and we're going to use a combination. So we're going to hit P for this layer to show position, and we're going to right click and separate the dimensions. So now we have a property for X, Y, and Z, and all we're going to use is Z, because that will let us do the 3D element. So I'll keyframe that, and I'll move over, and I'll move it forward or backward, whatever you want. Let's move this way forward just so we can really see it. And that's it for there. Now we're going to also add transform, the effect, and we're going to use keyframing on that effect to do the horizontals, to do the horizontal and vertical. So I'll keyframe that, and I'll move over, and I'll move it to the side. And even though I can see this X, Y, and Z, and I can see this effect, it gets really kind of limited here. So now that you've added keyframes, if you just hit U, it'll show you the keyframes for whatever you've keyframed. So now we can see position in 2D, and we can see the Z dimension as well. So it's not that difficult to work with. I can copy these, and I can do the same thing, reverse them, so it becomes just as easy to work with. Okay, now it's working in 3D and 2D, and if I select the transform, the X and Y is going to be relative to the layer, and the Z isn't going to be relative to the layer, but it's not moving left or right, it's just moving forward and back, so it doesn't matter. So I can copy both the transform and the Z position. I can go to another layer like this and paste it, and let's see if it worked. Yep, worked just fine. So now you can easily paste that same animation to different layers, and it'll work all the way through. Okay, so that's that problem essentially solved. Let's go back and let's look at our wall texture. And I've got another wall texture. I've decided to update it. So maybe you'll do this later in your project. And I'll import that new wall texture. And now because I've set this wall texture up in a composition, I can drag my new wall texture in and just put it in that same composition. And because the composition doesn't change size, when I go back, all of that animation is still just as valid and still works. And if I were to draw anything else in that composition, so I'll go into the wall texture again. If I were to draw or animate a shape in there, then all of that would come through and would still be seamless as well. And that's it. I hope that helped.